Welcome to Women's Perspectives, the podcast that celebrates powerful women who help change the world and strive to shape our future. 2023 was a record-breaking year for female musical artists, with 7 of the 10 biggest songs being written by women. And today I'm so excited because we get to dive headfirst into the enchanting world of Laufey, a rising star who is not only a classically trained musician, but she is bringing her jazz influences to create a whole new sound and genre. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. There's nowhere else I'd rather be.
Of course, I'm a fan, and I feel like it's a really exciting time to be able to talk to you after 2023 was just such a big year for you, dropping your second album, Bewitched, and I think you've brought onto this scene such a cool fusion of jazz with other genres that people have been so excited to hear, myself included. But I've just been so interested in hearing about your evolution from cello to the music that you make now. And I wanted to start way back. You come from a family of musicians, of violinists, right?
Yeah. So my mother, she's Chinese, and she grew up just in the Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing, and both my grandparents were musicians as well.
Wow.
So, and all classical musicians. So that was kind of the first thing I did growing up. It's always music in the house.
When did you discover kind of your personal love for music outside of it being a part of this family lineage?
Yeah.
When did you realize that this was something that you had wanted to pursue?
I think, for so many years, because I started so early, it was almost like a class in school.
When did you start?
I started when I was 4.
Wow.
Started taking piano lessons, and then I took cello lessons when I was 8. And I kind of, I went to school, I went to math class, like Icelandic class, science, and I came home and did an hour of cello, an hour of piano. I think it was when I started singing, when I was like maybe 12 or 13, when I really started to discover my own love for music. And then I had all these tools, that I had practiced up. And I also started playing in orchestra. And then music became like a social thing as well. So I'd go after school and play in orchestra, and I'd hang out with my friends, and we were all it was cute.
Right, there's a real community that was being built around it.
And it was like, oh, I'm not the only one who, practices Bach after school. Yeah.
Right, I can imagine finding one other person that plays Bach is an extreme bonding.
Yes, exactly. You have so much to talk about.
I love that. And then we both spent time in Boston for school.
We did, yeah.
And I just really loved hearing you talk about in an interview the transition of becoming a young woman when you entered college, because I think I went through such a parallel experience. I come from a super tight-knit family, and in many ways I feel like being a big sister and being a daughter was an identity that I was not only proud of, but it was kind of, how I moved through the world. And it was a very different transition to suddenly be like, okay, whoa, who is Yara in this new context where nobody knows me, and I'm figuring out how I want to present myself. It was both extremely overwhelming, but also a cool opportunity. And yeah, I was just wondering if you'd share about what that experience was for you.
Well, I feel very much the same. I was super close with my family. We moved around a lot growing up. I was kind of stuck between 3 cultures. I grew up partially in Washington, D.C., and then in Iceland, and then spent summers in China as well.
Wow.
So, because of that, I became really close with my family, and I have an identical twin sister. We're very, very close. So my identity was very much tied to her as well. And then it was very tied to music.
And you all went to different schools, right?
Yes, she went to university in Scotland and, went to study normal things, if you will. Whereas I went to jazz school in Boston. And it was definitely a learning experience for me, and kind of being in a new city and for the first time completely on my own. I came in and I was not the twin anymore. I was just Laufey, and it was definitely a shock to the system. And there were so many people in Boston that had come from different cultures and different backgrounds, and it was so amazing. But I think it was one of the most crucial things that I had to go through to become the musician that I am today, because it was after all those experiences that I became a songwriter, because I started journaling. Because before, when I was at home, I'd just talk to my sister. I'd vent to my sister about everything, or to my family. And then when I got to Boston, I had all these thoughts and feelings I wanted to get out, and And I just started writing them down, and then those journal entries eventually turned into songs.
I love that. And I could only imagine being a classically trained musician already being rigorous, but that transition to being a songwriter could be pretty nerve-wracking, I imagine, because it isn't just about perfecting certain works, but being very vulnerable about taking those journal entries and making them songs. First of all, I guess, what was the feeling that made you think it's time for me to share these personal moments and transition into songwriting?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in classical music, you're trained to become a player of music, not necessarily as much of a creator. Of course, there are moments of expression that you can put your own personal touch on it, but in general, you're playing other people's work, other composers. Whereas when I went to Boston, when I went to Berkeley, the musicians there, they were all creating music. They were producing and writing, and that was kind of what made you the star student. It was like the ones who were creating their own music. And so I think I always wanted to write, but I was a classical cellist and a jazz singer. And I was like, how do I mix these things together? But then I loved pop music as well. So I was like, how do I mix these things together to create a sound of my own? And who am I? And living in Boston, going to Berkeley, that was kind of when I formed that idea of who I was as a musician. And I wrote my first song that's actually about Boston called Street by Street. And I put it out, and that's kind of when everything started rolling. So
I feel like what so many people resonate with, myself included in your work, is that uniqueness that you're talking about of saying, okay, I've taken these parts of my world, and instead of just choosing one, I've blended them in this really cool way. And how would you describe that process? Do you feel like it just arrived to you when you wrote Street by Street, or is it something that you're constantly thinking about or reinventing?
Yeah, I think when I started, I thought about it a lot, because I don't think there hadn't been many songwriters writing new standards kind of in that form. So I was like, oh wait, is that possible? Like, is that okay? Really, anything is possible. You can make any kind of music.
But still, I think the question stands when you're doing something that hasn't been emulated, or where you can't just point to a ton of references.
Right. So yeah, it used to be quite compartmentalized to me. I was like, okay, that song is like more like a straight up jazz song. And then I'd write another song where I was like, that's like very classical, or I'd record it with an orchestra, and it would be like, that's more classically influenced. And I used to be really, thinking about those separate worlds, but now, and especially with Bewitched, I just mixed them all together and kind of did it however I wanted to, and kind of allowed myself to. I think growing up in classical music, I still have this sense of like needing to abide by a certain set of rules, and being a little bit scared also of like the classical community coming at me for like taking something and twisting it, or same with the jazz community. But yeah, for Bewitched, I just mixed it all together. I think the common denominator is that it's my writing, and it's my voice singing it.
You brought up two things that I want to discuss. One, I love the fact that you've discussed before the importance of breaking rules and how you've broken rules in your music. And is there a moment where you got comfortable with that, or where you landed on this mindset you have now of, I have an appreciation of the art form, I know what I'm pulling from, and that's all that it requires?
Yeah. I think it was probably around the time that I started writing, when I wrote Street by Street, that I was just like, okay, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'd been trained so hard to follow rules, and I was so scared. I think I was scared of people, saying something mean, or just judging me for doing something that was out of the norm. I kind of lived in fear of that kind of judgment. And the second I kind of let go of that, I had a lot more fun with music. When I started breaking the rules, that's when everything started to kind of work out for me.
Yeah, what did that letting go process feel like? Because I think one other thing that you brought up that is resonant, I think, for people, whether you're in entertainment or media or music or not, just being a young woman and being very aware of the critical voices that you're surrounded by. And I could only imagine you have many communities. You have the classical community, you have the jazz community, and then just this social media age in which all of us are participating on, and in many ways relying on audiences coming to our work. But that comes with so much unsolicited feedback.
Yeah.
So many things you didn't ask for. How have you found a way to manage that and come to that settled space?
It's definitely been something I had to learn in the past year. I think, with lots of great things happening in one's career, some not so great things follow as well, usually in the form of like a snide remark or, maybe a mean critique or something. But I think, if you look at any kind of art movement or anything, any music that has been remarkable in any way or changed anything, it's because they're breaking some set of rules or redefining a certain, genre or art form or something like that. And so the best thing I can do for myself is like, okay, if you're getting any kind of critique, that probably means you're doing something right.
And I think it's been refreshing the more these conversations are had, or you see, I think, other young women in spotlights, the fact that it is in many ways a communal experience. Not to say that you wish anybody else be critiqued, but I think the more people have continued to really be vulnerable and open about that experience of processing what it means to be a public figure or to be sharing anything with the world, their art, their work, the more it feels in many ways less personal and just more so just that noise that you have to figure out how to live with.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's noise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another kind of overlap we have is coming from bicultural households. And I know for me, being Black and Iranian has just informed my way of existence. And it must, therefore inform my art in ways that I may not even be fully aware of, but has been so pivotal in my upbringing. And I'm wondering, for you being Icelandic and of Chinese descent, if there's any particularities of how you grew up that you feel like really formed you as an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many ways in which, having a multicultural upbringing have made me the artist that I am today. I think one of the ways, not directly like musically, but that it's informed me is being able to relate to a lot of different cultures. It's, I feel like I get to, connect with like my Asian side and my Asian fans a lot because I have that side of me, but also like understand, like growing up partially in America, understanding American culture as well, and then like European culture via Iceland. So I think I have this understanding of how very big the world is and how many different cultures exist and how people think, differently and process things differently because of their background. But, also there's a certain part of me that, I grew up in Iceland, which is like, I love it. It's an extremely homogenous society. It's very, a lot of blonde hair and blue eyes, which I write about in one of my songs, actually. And I think that's something that a lot of people experience. And I think, there's a bit of a lack of representation, I think, for me in pop culture and in music, in pop music, or like current pop music. There just weren't many Asians. And so I almost conditioned myself to believe as a child that it wasn't for me. And I think that's one of the most hurtful things that, lack of representation does. It just trains like young kids who maybe want a career in that to think that it just isn't for them. And that's something that I, care a lot about. And I think it's informed a lot of the moves I've made, both as an artist, but also just someone that's in the spotlight.
Can we get into that more?
Yes.
I think I'd love to know. So, because what you're describing is an experience that, like you said, I feel like so many of us have. If you come from any sort of marginalized identity, it does require you seeing other people out in the world doing what you want to do to realize there's a space for you. But, in your case, if you're saying, you're looking at this pretty homogenous society, but then a pretty homogenous pop community and music community, when was that moment where you said, okay, I may not be seeing it, but that shouldn't prevent me from walking in and pursuing my own dreams?
It's kind of sad. I think I didn't realize it until it started happening. I think I was just...
But that's honest. I think that's how it happens for a lot of people.
Right, because I think I went to school. I was a rule follower. I went to this university. I did the classes. I did the work, and I was just making music alongside it. And then when it started moving, I was like posting videos on the internet as well of myself singing. And then when it started moving, I was like, oh, okay, so maybe it is possible. And I immediately started seeing like that I had a big Asian community of followers and fans, and that's been one of the biggest blessings. But yeah, it's funny, it didn't occur to me until it started. I had to like prove it to myself.
And then you were saying that it's also influenced, the importance of representation, the moves that you've made. Can you talk about how that has impacted how you've made certain career moves or the choices that you've made?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I am wary of doing a lot is just like, for example, when there are certain things like that are happening in the culture that have to do with like Asian or with Asians, I just, using my platform to like amplify that, talk about other Asian artists, talk about, Asian actors and films that are being made, stuff like that, just and engaging with the community and also talking about like not the struggles, but maybe like the difficulties of growing up and feeling like you're different. When I was young, I remember looking at artists and hearing the ones that I really looked up to. And when they talk about something that I related to, it was like weight in gold. It was like the most special thing. I guess that's what I think about a lot when I write songs. It's like, yes, it's something people often ask me, like, aren't you scared of putting all of your lyrics out there? And like, they seem so personal. And I'm like, yes, but then other people who've had that experience can maybe feel validated. And then when they tell me that they, have felt the same way as the song, that makes me feel validated too. Then I'm like, oh, I'm not the only one. I definitely use social media to talk to my audience. I'm, very aware of the fact that I have what I have because of their support. And it really is a community of people that enjoy the kind of music that I enjoy, and a community that I didn't have while growing up. So it just feels extra special.
I think it's sweet. We were talking about, as you perfectly said, third spaces. Was that the phrase? But
yeah,
that generationally, I think, especially now with social media, it's been the great connector, but in many ways, we're just rediscovering the importance of communal spaces.
Exactly.
And of still coming together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I read somewhere, someone was like, the internet has become the third space, which in a way has fostered my community because it kind of started during COVID. It absolutely started during COVID. I released my first song like 3 weeks into the pandemic.
Wow.
And
were you still in Boston?
I had literally left. I recorded Street by Street the last day I was in Boston. Just in a dorm, and then I went home the next day.
I think we were probably
like packing up the same day.
Yes, but sorry to interrupt, but then going back to you record Street by Street in a time of immense transition. You put it out while we're all in lockdown. What was that like to start to receive this response in a way that I'm sure was so different than being at Berkeley, and I could imagine receiving live feedback from peers, or it usually being a much more intimate experience?
Yeah, I mean, everything was so weird that first month that I feel like this happening almost just like it didn't feel like that because everything was just so odd already. It was really cool. I mean, I got back from campus, and the first day I was like, okay, I have 2 weeks or so, I thought, to write and record and like little videos on Instagram and just see what happens. And it's like, I like to say it's the one time I said I'd do something and it actually worked. So it kind of like, I think it started like, I just saw the views of the video go up and I was like, oh my goodness. And then I got a lot of followers coming in, and I was like, okay, I have this community now, and maybe I should like give them a video every 2 days just as entertainment since we're all bored at home. And then it kind of grew this community, and I would do these live streams, and it was people from all over the world, and we'd kind of talk about the state of the world, and I'd just sing whatever standards or songs that I'd written that week. And that was kind of the pandemic, and it kind of just grew slowly, and I released a song in the middle of it. And yeah, so it started by community, and I think that's why it's continued to be such a strong community, and it's been a fun thing to go back to the third spaces point. It's been a fun thing to now actually see them gather at the concerts and, kind of dress up in a certain way and exchange books and bracelets and meet friends at these concerts. It's the best thing ever.
So then what keeps you inspired in the field? Because I can imagine that it's incredibly gratifying to share your music, but it is also a full-time job, and you do have to treat it like a business at times. So in this space, how do you stay inspired to stay in this craft and just generally to keep going amidst the busyness?
I think I just love music so much, and I can't imagine doing anything else. That in some subconscious way, I'm like, I have no choice. This is what I have to do. But I mean, other than that, like the audience, the fans, like I could never let them down. Like if they're listening, I'm gonna be making music.
Wow.
So.
And so what kind of art are you intaking in your free time? If you have a down day, just what are you up to?
Down day, I feel like my life is so like all the time. There's so much like traveling, very loud, lots of people. I like just very quiet things. I like going to like a coffee shop with a book and like disappearing into a corner.
Right, because this book club of yours, we haven't even gotten into, you mentioned it, but how long has it been going?
So I started it about a year ago. It's been on a little tour hiatus. But it's coming
naturally?
back. Naturally, yes. It's coming back, and I thought it was just a really fun way of bringing the community together. So I'd choose a book at the top of the month, and it's all been female authors so far, which wasn't intentional at first. I just realized I only read books by female authors. And then we read the book, and I craft up a couple of questions, and I do a live stream at the end of the month, and we talk about it, and then it usually ends up just being a chat about life and updates, and it's like a little club within a club.
But it is important to carve out that time for yourself, because I can imagine, I think, as an actor, my schedule is very much set by somebody else, but it also means that when I'm not filming, I have no responsibilities, whereas I can imagine music, because you are responsible for generating the next thing. It all lies with you, and when you're inspired and when you go into a studio,
right,
that it requires both a lot of motivation, but also I can imagine a lot of boundary setting to say, here are the certain things that I think of as sacred or necessary. My downtime, my quiet time, my book time.
Yeah, it is something I've also learned last year I think I was such a yes woman first. I was like, any opportunity, I was like, I'm so lucky to have that. And then I definitely ended up with quite an insane schedule. And although my schedule is still quite insane, I think teaching myself, this was probably hard also just as a classical music kid, like, because I was just, it was such a disciplined life. Downtime, a day off is work as well, or it's a crucial part of the job. Because if you don't have that, you can't create. And as an artist, like, our jobs are to take life, live it, and then interpret it into something.
The living life.
If you don't live it, you don't have anything to create out of it. So yeah.
But you've brought up just such a great point, because I think as young women in these industries, but just as a person that is coming face to face with opportunities that we may have only dreamed of, there is this feeling that it's my responsibility to make the most of this and to say yes to everything. And so it is a journey to end up in that settled space where you're able to continue to discern what's meant for me and what needs to be passed on, just so that I can preserve, what made this art or this moment special to begin with, which is the life I'm living.
Exactly. Yeah. It's learning to prioritize what does the most for the job, but also what does most for my heart.
Have you figured out certain anchoring points? Like last year?
Yes, kind of.
My last 2 years, what I called my year of no.
Oh, wow.
And this last quarter leading into this year has been my year of hard yes, which is saying yes to things that bring out an immediate visceral positive reaction,
right,
and letting everything else kind of wash away.
Yeah.
So what has that been for you?
The one thing that I really lacked growing up, that once I acquired it, it really changed my life, was confidence. Like I talk about this so much. It's like I just lacked confidence growing up. And then the second I had confidence, that's when things started moving.
Do you remember that moment?
Yeah, I think it was like my freshman year of college, where I was like, I think I'd come into my own as a woman a little bit. And I started having a little bit of a mentality where it was like, okay, I don't really care what people say. I'm going to do my own thing. I think I needed to kind of learn to stand on my own 2 feet to get there.
it's a continuous journey, but what a beautiful one.
Yes, it really is a hard one for women,
Yes.
but important one to talk about.
Most definitely. I think it is these shared spaces, like you said, the weight in gold of
Yes.
hearing anything that you can relate to so personally that's shared on this mass scale.
Exactly.
And this cultural level is always reassuring.
Yeah, it's so important.
Thank you.